Hey, welcome everyone. This is Chuck Hogan with Your Best Life, and welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on respective app stores and iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure that you leave a comment. The app is completely free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, and Roku sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. So I know we say this every week, and I'm going to say it again. You are in for a treat. Um, this beautiful soul is someone who I've had the pleasure of not only calling a mentor, an executive strategist, a best-selling author, but truly a friend. Someone who's been there through thick and thin, and when I've gone through trials and tribulations, because the big question is if you're a neurostrategist, who strategizes with a neurostrategist? I said, a better strategist. So welcome the one, the only, the beautiful, the gorgeous Deb Battersby to the YBL cable show tonight. Deb, thank you for being here, my friend. I've been jonesing to have you on. I was like, oh, I knew this was going to be the most amazing experience. And so part of the question that I wanted to lead with tonight for you is, how you feeling?
I am feeling really good about many, many things in life. And I'm feeling a little distressed about some of the things that are going on in the world today.
Mm.
So, we can certainly have really great feelings about some things and not so great feelings about others. And so I'm kind of experiencing both sides of the coin.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the honesty. And that leads us into this amazing topic of conversation, which has been a lifelong passion and area of expertise for you, which is emotional well-being. And this ideology of about that we have these different modalities, such as a freedom point where we can actually find release and freedom. So let me ask you, there's a lot of folks, to your point, that are feeling conflicted this evening with what's going on in the world. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And yet to those that are involved, they would might say something different, that for them it makes complete sense, that this has been generations of atrocities back and forth, and that's their comeuppance, and this is how they're going to express themselves, and they're going to get their pound of flesh, and there's going to be retribution. What can you say, Deb, about this positive negative influx, this yin and yang, if you will, of emotions?
Well, the reality is that we are, God, we're myriad emotions at any moment in time, and so much of our emotional reference bank has a lot to do with our upbringing, our beliefs, and what we have been taught. You know, we don't generally resent things unless we've learned that there's something about that is, you know, unsavory, inappropriate, unacceptable.
Mm,
So so much of our education will impact how we respond emotionally to many different events. And so I think the more important thing is to realize that whatever emotion you're experiencing, whether it's grief or sadness or anger, resentment, fury, rage, whatever you're experiencing, I believe that there is massive intelligence in every single emotion that you experience. And that I think the challenge that we have is that somehow or other we've never really been informed as to what is the intelligence behind each emotion we experience and what is the intention behind that intelligence.
mm,
And I kind of simplify it from the, going to how do you really break everything down to a common denominator? And it kind of it really focuses around the whole idea of quantum theory, that if everything, every single thing that exists is nothing more than energy, and in that energy, there is a frequency, and that frequency contains information. So, if you can wrap your head around that and really simplify things to the point that, okay, everything is energy and information. So, my curiosity began with, if that's true, then how does that relate to our emotional experience? If emotion is energy, and it's often defined as energy in motion because it stimulates movement of some kind in the body. And so
Yes.
in that case, then if it's information, then what is the intention behind that information? We associate a feeling to the emotion because it is a physical response to whatever stimulus we're taking in. And the human body is a massive receiver. It's taking in and calibrating information all the time. And although we do have the capacity to create emotion by focusing on something specific, but most often, our emotions are a response to something that we're experiencing. Maybe it's the way someone looks at you, or tone of voice, or traffic, or the news, or horrible things happening or beautiful things happening. That it's kind of like it's the response is triggered by something that's going on in the external environment. And so it just kind of occurred to me that, well, if we are receivers of this information, maybe there's more to it. Maybe there's
Mm,
something deeper in just the experience of the emotion. I get curious about what's the intention behind the emotion. And so in most cases, and I want to give you an extreme example, because I've been exploring this work for 23 years now. It's been, and what I've always been curious about is if if the emotion is just pure energy and information, then, and if as human beings, every system in the body is designed for survival, growth, and thriving. And so,
mm,
how does this system relate to those fundamentals? And so, in the case of looking at emotions, um, I've kind of figured out a way to tap into brainwave frequencies that are beyond the conscious thinking, kind of dropping out of that beta brainwave frequency into an alpha state or even lower, where you have access to wisdom that's greater than the intellect. It's wisdom in the
mm,
body, it's wisdom in the subconscious. And so once I discovered how we can do that, then I just got curious about, can I actually communicate with this energy and this information? And lo and behold, guess what? You can. And that was a pretty exciting discovery. And so I began creating, or testing more accurately, testing
mhm.
the conversation. What, how do I communicate with it? What questions do I ask? What allows me to receive information from these energies, these emotions, without steering them to a particular outcome or a particular conclusion, or
Right.
implanting a particular perspective or agenda. So how do you keep those questions open-ended, and so you can trust that they are actually from the wisdom of that individual? And so for me, it was just discovering that in always looking for the intelligence behind it, I discovered that there is immense wisdom in every emotional expression. And
Definitely.
I'm always asking, if this emotion is here, and I know that it's here to serve me, because it only makes sense that anything that we experience as human beings, we are not designed as self-destructive instruments. Every
Correct.
living form is designed for survival and
Mm,
thriving, everything. And so, just, put two and two together, then you say, well, okay, if we're not designed for self-destruct, then, and these painful emotions are still here, why are they here? If they're here to help me either survive or thrive or progress and grow in some way, then why are they here, and how do they work? And I want to kind of give an example because something that is really at the root of, so much of the strife in the world today is hatred and greed. That, and so what is the intention of hatred? If there was a positive intention behind it, what on earth could that possibly be?
Mm.
And this was one I really struggled with understanding because I couldn't logically come up with any conclusion that would make hatred a worthy and supportive emotion. And a number of years ago, I was doing a session with a client, and it came up that she had this intense hatred toward her mother-in-law. And because in my own world, I find hatred so distasteful and so destructive that I couldn't accept it. I couldn't really understand how that could possibly serve her. And I also knew that it was an emotion that I would never allow myself to feel because I thought it was so wrong and so bad and so inappropriate. And what I discovered, and I've had this validated a number of times, is that the reason hatred comes is because it is one of the strongest forms of defense that we can
Yes.
have. And that it's kind of like if you think about football, you talk about the game of football, that, the best offense is a great defense. And
Correct.
so hatred is a defense mechanism. And that when we feel hatred, it allows us to depersonalize or push away that which we feel is going to harm or threaten us. And so
Mm.
by hating something, we go on the defensive and we push and we push and we push away to the point where what I discovered in the conversation with this energy is that if I push you so far, if I desensitize to you, then you can't hurt me. And so, as kind of convoluted as that sounds, the reality is that if we hate something so much and we push it so far away that it doesn't come close to us, it can't touch us, it's a really powerful and weird way of protecting ourselves. And so when we don't understand that that's what's really going on, then we, through dialogue and conversation and agitation, we flip it into aggression. And
Yes.
that is when, you know, obviously that, that's never its intention. Its real intention is protection. But when when it's idealized and
Yes.
justified and
Yes.
and
And normally that happens after the fact.
yes.
That justification is after.
Mhm.
To your point, because the hatred, the presupposition to it is fear and defense. To your point,
Mhm.
and there's something that just came into this too that just popped into my mind's eye for a moment, and that was in that moment you're almost outside of self. That it's that all the external references, because we start to see it polarizing. And to your point earlier in the conversation, that frequency starts to attract who? Other people who are living
Absolutely.
in that state of fear.
Exactly. And as that frequency is, conjoined, it gets amplified and it grows. And pretty soon, what happens to this hatred, it becomes a philosophical perspective. And then,
You know,
and then it gets revered.
yes.
It's like, well, it's becomes its own religion. And this is why it's so important for us to understand our emotions, because if we understood them and could actually work with them in a healthy way, things could never escalate to this point. And as I think as a species, that this is a huge part of the evolution of consciousness. And
Yeah.
it seems like every time it seems like the world is getting closer to being more conscious and more caring and more loving, that insane things happen and we feel like, oh my God, we're regressing thousands of years in a heartbeat.
And I'm reminded of not the pendulum ideology, but more of the yin and yang, where life is seeking synergy, is seeking harmony. And it's kind of like when you look at a meteor or an asteroid that's circling, it gets closer to some planets and it gets way further out in others because it gets momentum. And part of this is that closeness all of a sudden is, to your point, action, disruption. It has gravity to it. It's changing the uniformity of what is. And it also does something else too, because it comes in waves. We don't see this consistently. So if there's civil unrest, if there's outrage, we've had two world wars, we've had other skirmishes, pre and post. And I noticed something interesting too, Devin. I'd love to get your take on this. I love what we're discussing, by the way. So thank you for
Well,
this.
it certainly isn't where I intended to go. It's just somehow or other what's happening in the world today seems important to talk about, and
Yes.
and help us all frame, not only what's happening, but why is it happening and how did it happen and what do we need to do differently to reverse this reverence to justifying violence.
Well, we're finding now too that generationally there are some different modalities that are occurring. So if we were to go back to the baby boomers who fought through world wars, and then now those that were mortal enemies are commiserating together about their experiences and healing through the process. And it's like, okay, is that a matter of time or is it awareness? And I go, I wonder if it was just that in the moment it was us against them, and that it becomes so primordial that
Mhm.
that again, because we know whatever resists is going to persist. That in that moment in the narrative, it's like you're a good soldier, you follow marching orders, you do
Yep.
this, and you have two young 16-year-olds pointing weapons at each other. Neither one wants to take the other person's life. Where it gets interesting for me today is that when we start to look at the millennial and zennial generations,
Mhm.
and without exception, they rally behind what they consider to be worthy
Yes,
causes.
absolutely.
And so, if it's global warming, if it's the new Green Deal, if it's covered calls or shorting the marketplace financially, if it's politically, and it's like look even our current politics here in the United States. There's such extremism,
Okay.
and it's the same as what we're seeing in other parts of the world, where a handful, it's not everyone, it's not an entire religion, it's not an entire sect of people. And in fact, they're coined as being radical. They're coined as being so
Extremists,
far
yeah.
out, right, and kind of outliers in some ways. Yet their narrative is getting through, where they are creating this gravity and this wave of energy, and that's what their skill set is. They're great at creating narrative
Mhm.
that gets buy-in, real or unreal, true or untrue. And it's like,
And, the interesting thing about our emotion is that dialogue is influencing emotion, because remember, we respond emotionally to
mm,
information, and whatever information we're being given is stirring the emotional pot in one direction or another. And
wow,
so when we look at emotions like outrage and anger, that if those are things you're experiencing, as a result of what you're seeing going on in the world right now, usually outrage is an emotion that demands that you do something about what's going on. Anger means that usually that you're angry at yourself because you haven't done anything to intervene, that you or you haven't made a difference in the way that you felt that you should have. So oftentimes, and most often in my experience, with thousands of different people, is that anger ultimately is, although we direct it outward, most of the time we're angry at ourselves for not speaking up, not standing up, not taking the action that we know is appropriate out of fear of being judged or disapproved of in some way. So we're
Right.
usually angry when we let our fear get the better of us. Outrage kind of moves it to a whole nother level. And usually, when people are truly experiencing outrage, it's a demand, it's an
Mm.
emotional demand to take action in some way. And it
Right.
doesn't always mean positive action. It
Oh,
just means do something about it. And depending on your beliefs and your rules about how life should be, the something you do about it may be healthy and positive or completely destructive.
and your point is so poignant right now because it just dawned on me that in that fear, there are so many people who are looking for connection. They're looking that, okay, am I crazy? And when the minute you feel someone else's energy and they're as elevated at your level or even higher, if they're below you, there's convincer strategies that you start to use and go, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, what do you feel about this? And all of a sudden, it's like this narrative starts to get fed
Mhm.
where
And
it gets.
and, the more drama involved, the more the, intensity of the emotion escalates. And,
Oh,
so, understanding human emotions um, is really paramount in us, making progress as a social organization, as a global society, understanding what is it that what are these emotions derived from, and what is the message that comes with those emotions, and what are the consequences? Because one of the things that's been really brilliant and beautiful about what I've discovered is that when identifying a particular emotional pattern, I've discovered that there are upsides and downsides to every single pattern, and that
yes.
even the ones that we hold most dear and feel are most supportive and healthy and helpful, they have downsides. And that and but the beautiful thing about the intelligence of, the human being is that we have access to emotional resources that no one has ever taught us how to tap into. And
Yes.
that when we are experiencing an emotion that seems restrictive or debilitating in any way, that we actually have emotional resources that we can call on to mitigate the downside of any pattern. And, this is what I find so fascinating and intriguing about my work, is discovering what are these, I kind of like to call them antidote patterns. What is the antidote to fear? And what is the antidote to anger? What is the antidote to self-doubt? And it's it's the mitigating factor, and it's always an emotion, and
Very.
it's always a resource that we have access to, because once again, the emotion is purely energy and information that vibrates at a particular frequency. And the cool thing is, and obviously, I am not a neuroscientist, so I cannot claim the scientific efficacy behind any of this. I just know how it works and when it
Yeah.
works. And so it's so.
And I've experienced it with you, Deb, so I can vouch for the efficacy. It's something too that in this grand scheme of what we are experiencing, there's another level to this too that I would love to table to you in regards to this specific conversation, and that is artificial intelligence.
Mm.
We are moving into a realm now
Mhm.
um, that is uncharted territory.
Yes.
where we have potential sentient artificial intelligence. Right now, ChatGPT inarguably is almost at the level of the smartest human being on the planet. It depends on who you speak to.
Mhm.
Personal opinion is it's already surpassed the most high level intelligence quotient because it's the amassed sum of all data and
Yes.
information. Um, and it's already experimenting with divergent. Here's the crazy part: by 2025, they're guesstimating very conservatively that it'll be 100%. So us plus 100% more, double
Wow.
the intellectual quotient by 2025.
I think I'm really curious about now, um, all of this AI is based on gathered intel. And
Yes,
my question, is there enough intel on if in the around the emotional range and what are the emotions here to do? I know that I suspect that they can define these emotions very precisely.
yes.
Can they create them?
Well, so this is where the narrative is going, and you are so in my head right now. I love this, but we've always had that kind of connection. Here's what's interesting: if the footprint, the building block foundation, is the combined data that's actually been levied into the system, so to speak, by not only theory or conjecture or hyperbole, we should be able to create more emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
So raising the EQ to match the IQ.
That would be
And
fascinating, and, and my hope is that with that advancement, that we would actually be able to educate humans on the actual real intention behind emotions, how emotions work, how to actually
yes,
influence your emotions, how to understand your emotions, how to engage and partner different emotions. Uh, because for me, this is a playground. I love to, work with the subconscious to see what's possible. And,
yes.
you know, I'm curious if AI will be able to raise human consciousness with its additional knowledge and insights.
So there's this philosophy of fake it till you make it,
Mhm.
face it till you make it, faith it as you make it, and then believe as you achieve. The reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is that the rudimentary AI that is robotics that has taken over for humans relative to sensory motor coordination in the automobile line, in production of microchips, and the amount of sensory skill required. They're finding now with nano robotics and micro movements that these robots are far more experienced than even the finest physicians when it comes to
Wow.
surgery. And they're doing neonatal and prenatal
Yeah.
maintenance. So there's a point to this though, and that is Julie and I and two of my children went and saw a movie called The Creator a couple of
Oh,
weekends. And this movie is about the blending of AI and human. And I won't ruin it for everyone. For all of our listeners out there, it's a brilliant expose in relation to how they've blended the ecologies of human and robotics together
mm,
to the point where human and robotics have actually been able to create an embryo, and within this embryo they actually add to it a completely sentient AI growth pattern, and so it
wow.
literally
Oh my
knows.
gosh. It's kinda like, sign me up. It sounds like so much fun.
I left this movie,
Yeah.
Deb, numb.
Ooh.
You know me well.
Mhm. So
uh,
provocative, you don't know where to go with it.
I have goosies even talking about it
Yeah.
right now. It was such an advent. Um, Full disclosure, I cried like a 5-year-old little boy.
Wow. Oh,
And I'm watching actors and animation and robotics And what was not lost on me, to your point, was there was a sentience in the interaction and in motive and intention that was deafening, was deafening to listen and see and hear, where human condition was, it's a robot, just shut it off, or dispatch it. There were sentient robots slash humans, cybernetics, if you will, having funerals for other cybernetics. There were cybernetics that were raising children.
Mm.
There were humans who were elevating and educating the cybernetics because they have the capacity to grow and understand and feel and emote. And it's like,
And that, I think that is my question is, if AI is literally programmed information, then, I really am curious is how does that translate to emotion? And can we safeguard the emotional track in such a way that there is compassion and kindness and empathy and caring for all beings, robotics and otherwise, so and gosh, we haven't even gotten humanity to that point, but if we can get artificial intelligence to that point, maybe artificial intelligence will get humanity to that point. Who knows?
and possibly here's where it started getting so deep for me is Asimov's rules of robotics. There are three laws, and actually, I don't know if you knew this. I did not know this. My brilliant wife looked it up. There's a fourth law.
Oh,
It goes to the crux of exactly what you were mentioning earlier. This is what sparked this part of the conversation. The fourth law. So the first law is you can't harm a human.
right.
If you're told to, you cannot harm a human. It cannot result in harm to a human. Second one is that the robot has the right to protect itself as long as it does not
Harm.
interfere with harm a
Mhm.
human. The third one is that someone else can give a command to the robot, but the robot cannot harm itself or harm someone else. So it's like, okay, this seems like a pretty safe safeguard, and they're stacked on one
Right,
another.
right.
Till you get to number 4.
Ooh, I'm curious.
The robot has the right to propagate, to expand and live, as long as it doesn't interfere with the first 3 laws.
Mm.
So it's literally giving it the quotient to grow, to live,
Mhm.
to advance. And there's a part of this movie, and I'm going to give one bit of a spoiler.
Okay.
They are able to scan this computer we call the brain, and in a drive, take all the data, the emotion, the intelligence, the
Whoa.
feelings,
Whoa.
the moment, upload it into one of these symbiotes that has the exact same face, that has the exact same body, that has all the height, the spatial expressions, down to the microfiber. And as it starts up, it's as if you are with your loved one right now.
Wow.
And it was like, holy smokes.
I'm just thinking about one of those horror films that I saw when I was like really, 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 really young, called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where this,
Yes.
here's this seed pod that can actually take the form and the mannerisms and all the intelligence of a being. And okay, so I thought that was pretty spooky back
There's
then.
a difference, though. It's most of the crux of what you were saying, though, motive and intention. Taking over someone by comparison to augmenting or continuing someone. And I go, wow, that has some merit to it. And then I was reminded, though, in this movie, this
Mm.
military man who has prostheses because he was damaged, he was injured in an altercation, falls in love with this woman, and this is where it got really deep. She, to them, was known as a god. And the reason why is she was the birth mother to this child. who they took the embryo and combined with symbiote technology to create the most advanced growing. So this wasn't a full grown symbiote. This was a child who had the ability to continue to grow, to live and expand
Wow.
till it grew to mature. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, now we've gone to a whole nother level.
Wow.
The level of emotion.
It's really fascinating. This is kind of moving me in another direction, and that is that, you know, uh, the last few years of my life have been a little bit more in exploring the spiritual side of things. And
Yes.
that one of the things that I believe is that creation seeks to experience and express itself, and that every single human being, and this is only my perspective, you can agree with it or not, and that is that the divine is expressing through each and every living uh, entity, and especially
Yes.
through human beings, and that the way source, the divine, the infinite God, creator, whatever you want to call it, expresses and learns is through expressing through life forms, and that
Mm.
it's that I guess my hunch is kind of along the lines of this movie philosophy, is that its desire is to expand its intelligence, to expand its influence, and to express and to learn through many different experiences. So
Yes.
this kind of like, wow, this is mind blowing in so many ways, because here you're getting artificial intelligence that thinks like creation. I mean,
It does. And
wow.
well, and here's what's really bananas. It's looking to coexist peacefully with mankind.
Mm,
It's mankind's fear that wants to eliminate this, and it was due to a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding that was actually ended up being routed back to human error.
mm,
And so, isn't it amazing that when we find justification in a just cause or a higher cause, because it's us against them, big guys trying to take advantage of the little guy.
right.
It's intelligence, artificial intelligence has no place because it's artificial and it can never be good as the real thing. And it's like going, well, we've done a pretty good job of screwing up the good thing.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
planet Earth,
that is so
air, water.
fascinating, because if AI wants to peacefully coexist with humanity, it, it seems like AI may be capable of that. Is humanity capable of that?
Some,
We
some,
we seem to not even be able to coexist harmoniously with the rest of humankind. That there's them and us, there's judgment, there's separation, there's that if your ideology is different, there's something wrong with you, or if you dress differently or you speak differently, that you are somehow not equal, or uh, not somehow or other trustworthy. And, I'm curious about how deep are the wounds of various tribes and cultures and institutions that keep us holding on to ancient conflicts and perpetuating them over and over again and justifying them in doing so. So we have the emotional intelligence to move beyond it. We just don't know how to work with it. And my hope, my sincere hope, is that neuroscience, that psychologists, psychiatrists, that, and mostly scientists, though, because the brain scientists are really on track with what happens um, in brain plasticity. How do you change human programming? And we have, generations of programming developed, and
oh,
or entrenched based on wounds from ages ago.
generational. Look at, I can tell you as a half Japanese young man, well, I'll say mature man now. Um, that being of Irish descent and Japanese descent was very interesting because I meet other Asian cultures. And although more modern, I'll say millennial generations are more desensitized because they've grown up in a global world, that there are still some people that I meet and they go, "Oh, you sure you're Japanese?" I said, "Hi, I was born in Japan." And they're like, "Oh." And all of a sudden the energy shifts.
Mm.
Comes out my heritage wasn't necessarily as cordial and inviting when they tried to take over their country during World War II.
Mhm.
And so there's this residual, to your point, there's a generational imprinting
Exactly.
that has occurred.
And I know for, I remember studying behavioral, just behavioral psychology back in the 80s, and really the belief that, that our emotional patterns and our ideology is not, it's not genetic, that it's actually, it's nurture versus nature. And
Yes.
I I tend to, dispute that, and I think there's a whole lot of information that's come to light recently that
Mhm.
recognizes that there are many emotional patterns that are genetically transferred. And if you look at populations that have been persecuted for generations, the intensity of those generational patterns are they are intense. They really are.
Mhm.
And most of the time, they're experienced as real for people who've never been involved in the kinds of conditions or experiences or atrocities that were perpetuated upon their ancestors. And so,
Right.
this is another thing in terms of, and why I'm such an advocate of working on emotional uh, just reorganizing emotional patterns, because so many of those patterns are so fear and mm, just so fear based that
Yes.
they restrict, any of us who experience them in more ways than we can consciously fathom, and we
Yes.
don't even understand why we have these extreme fears or these extreme judgments. We don't know, and yet this is certainly not from personal experience, and oftentimes not from teaching, but actually from a passing down of these emotional patterns through genetics.
I wonder if it's the energetic imprint. It's no different than the neuroreceptors in your body that when your body knows what it needs. And so it will seek symbiosis to another energy that it can connect with. And this happens without us even thinking about it.
Yeah,
Someone will walk in a room and there's an attraction and you're like going, well, they're not even my type. So physically from a visual standpoint, but there's an energetic footprint and you're like going, holy
right.
smokes, this makes so much sense once there's some exposure and vulnerability. Now, this is where you and I've had conversations about like-minded, like-hearted, and it's one is where your energetic unconscious starts to open up and you start to create synergy. And it's not that you can't gain respect. I'll use our relationship as an example. I don't know that I've ever had to try for you and I to have open, fully disclosed conversation. I always have felt you as my kindred and someone I love and adore and appreciate. And I honestly can't go back and go, well, I've ever had a conversation with Deb Battersby that I just didn't thoroughly enjoy. And so people go, what? I go, it could have been 2 a.m. We're having a conversation. Guess what? It was fruitful and kind and compassionate and loving. And I don't know that that was either one of our intentions. It was more so that within the space to each other's conjoined
Yeah.
energy, that's kind of the secret sauce, if you will.
Well, there's something fascinating about that. There may be a frequency of trust. Every emotion has a
Mhm.
frequency. And you know how there's just some people you can enter into a conversation with and, you can know each other's life stories in a matter of minutes. And there are other people that
Very
you
much
never
so.
share
The first
anything.
we
Yeah. And
right.
so and so energetically, I think, human beings are like tuning forks. We kind of, whatever frequency is really strong, we're going to somehow adjust to the most
Mm,
powerful frequency. And, so we tune into that because we talk about tuning into people all the time, but we think we're doing it intellectual. We're not. It's
that's
the frequency that everything is frequency, everything is energy and information. So if we're tuning in, then our frequencies are already closely aligned and it's easy to make that adjustment. That it's so fascinating, what we're talking about here in that, emotional intelligence. I guess the caveat that I have around emotional intelligence, and we think, and there's tools to assess emotional intelligence, and that really is about how well do you read situations? How well do you read people? And my take on emotional intelligence is a little shift from that is it's not emotional intelligence. If you really embrace the concept that all emotion is intelligent, you would now begin to respect it in a way that you can work with it for in support of the highest good. That as soon as we start to judge certain things, we shut ourselves off to that experience. So we also shut ourselves off to the intelligence and the education behind that communication, and so
yeah.
we remain naive and very judgmental.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many places to go with this conversation, Chuck, and it's always
Well,
fascinating to me.
I always enjoy the enlightenment and the engagement with you, my friend. I know we're coming up to the close. If you can believe it already, 50 minutes has almost gone by.
Yeah.
And I'll state this one last thing, and then I'd like to ask you for any insights or distinctions that you have that you'd like to leave with our community tonight. Um, it wasn't lost on me that if this, I'll call it EQ, the emotional quotient,
Mhm.
is fueled also by our physical health and well-being and our spiritual wealth and well-being, and as well as our mental. So body, mind, and spirit become a huge part of feeding the health and vitality
Mm.
of these emotions as well. And
And
so we
it's
can't just
it's it is one of those cybernetic loops that the stronger the body, usually the more grounded and more stable the emotional construct, and that, but the more wisdom in the emotional awareness, usually the more health and wellness in the body as well, and the mind. I don't know that we have much time to cover this, but I had an interesting, really fascinating conversation with a client just earlier today. And I have been curious about, I'm always interested in what emotional patterns are limiting and need to be released, what emotional patterns need to be upgraded and partnered with other powerful resources. And, what emotional patterns can we actually install to increase our capacity and our ability to, to accomplish what we want, but also to have the positive impact we want to have in the world. And I had this conversation, and I hope we can wrap this up quickly. But I was curious about what would happen if you partnered um, emotional intelligence, the intellect, the intuition, insight, foresight, and inner knowing. And, so I facilitated a session where we actually did that. And at the end of the session, I, was asking the person, now what, if anything, feels different? And what she said was, "Oh my God, I feel like I have superpowers." And I said, "And so what's your level of confidence and certainty at the moment?" And she said, If I could say a level 10, I'd have to say a level 10 times 10." And so I share that because I want people to understand that this emotional capacity you have, the wisdom of emotions that once you learn how to really work with them, there are so many beautiful ways to empower yourself and to empower others in ways that are so healthy and uplifting and can have such a positive impact in the world.
Well, we are going to save that as the cliffhanger because we are going to come back and do this again. I'm going to ask you in front of 1.2 million people tonight. Are you up for coming back and having a deeper
I would
discussion?
love it. And, I know honestly that you don't like to get into process, but I'd love to find out from our listeners if they'd be open to experiencing a little bit of a process so that it becomes more than a concept to you, that it becomes an experience for you so that you can trust this brilliant emotional system that you have and see where we go.
Well, here's the great news, Deb. I know the host and the executive producer, so we're going to make this happen.
That works for me.
I love you, my friend. Thank you so much for sharing your love, light, and wisdom with all of us. I'm going to remind all of our guests that this show can be heard also on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check us out for all the news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.